Hi everyone, and welcome back to the video and the channel. And today we are doing a ranking video. This is something that I don't usually do on the channel, but because I watched all the James Bond movies except for the Craig movies, because I've seen the Craig movies on the channel, I thought I would do a little ranking on my opinions on the movies, where I would put them on this tier list that I have made. I will also be ranking the Craig movies, so if you were very curious about what I thought about each Craig movie, I'll be giving a little bit of information about that in this video as well. As you can see, the tier list is divided into 5 tiers. I tried to do like quotes from James Bond movies or James Bond titles and stuff, but as you can see, one of them just says good because I couldn't think of a quote, so I just wrote good. But basically, James Bond is like amazing, shaken not stirred is like great, good is good, obviously shocking, positively shocking. If you know where that quote is from, then you're a true James Bond fan. But that one is like meh, and Live and Let Die is like, that was not a great James Bond movie. But the reason I thought Live and Let Die was a good title for the last one is because even though the James Bond movies that are going to go in there are bad, I still think that they are watchable. So, you know, live, because I will watch them, but also let's push them aside and let them die a little bit. Also, if you're looking at the movies that are located at the bottom, you'll notice that Never Say Never Again, because it's not an official James Bond movie, isn't on there, but I will be putting that in as well. And then also No Time to Die isn't on there because I guess this tier list was made before No Time to Die, but I'll also be talking about No Time to Die in this tier list as well. Okay, let's kick things off. I've never done a tier list before, and I'm really excited to do this because I'm really excited to show you what my rankings of these movies are, and then I'm excited to see what your guys' rankings of the movies are. Remember, these are my personal opinions. If one of the movies that you really love is at the very bottom at Live and Let Die or Shocking, then I'm very sorry about that. And I know everyone has a different James Bond, like favorite James Bond movie, so I'm really excited to hear what your guys' favorites are, and I'm hoping that you're excited to hear what mine are. So we're gonna go through them in order, so starting out with Dr. No. Ooh, where do I put this one? Well, first of all, I think Dr. No is a really fun movie. I think there are a lot of flaws in this movie, but I think it's still a really fun movie. It starts off the James Bond adventure, and so I think I'm gonna put it in good. I don't think Dr. No is great or amazing, but I think it is good. It is very watchable. It starts us off with the nice James Bond theme song that runs throughout the entire franchise, and it's just a fun movie. We get our first introduction to Sean Connery. He gets to say Bond, James Bond, a very iconic opening line for his character. And yeah, it kind of starts us off, but it doesn't have a lot of the James Bond tropes that we are coming to love, because that comes in a little bit later. So I think good is where I would put this. The next one, From Russia with Love. If you guys watched my video on From Russia with Love, you know that I absolutely loved this movie. I think this is a James Bond. I think this is a top tier James Bond movie. It doesn't have some of the tropes that we're used to in James Bond. Like, it doesn't have a lot of the like big gadgets and stuff like that, or goofy gadgets, but it is such a fun, like, thriller, kind of slow-paced James Bond film, one that we didn't get as much of in the coming James Bond films, and something that I wish the movies would kind of resort to a little bit more, is this slower-paced kind of mystery thriller James Bond style thing. It happens a few times, and when it does, I really enjoy them, but this one I thought was excellent. The train sequence in From Russia with Love is what I remember the most about this movie, and it is so phenomenally well done. The theme song from Russia with Love is great. The music in this movie is fantastic. I think Sean Connery puts in one of his best performances in From Russia with Love. Everything about this movie I absolutely love. Get it? Because From Russia with Love, I love. Yeah, that was bad. Goldfinger. Okay, so Goldfinger is very interesting to me because I thought it was only okay when I first watched it. I thought it was really fun, but I thought it was an only okay movie. But after watching all of the James Bond movies, I'm gonna put it in shaken, not stirred. Yes, if I had put this movie in a ranking video right after I'd watched it, I probably would have put it in good, but I thought it was worse than Dr. No. However, looking back on it now, it is so much fun, and it is the James Bond movie that introduces us to the world of James Bond in terms of the gadgets, the punchlines, the music, just everything that we know about James Bond. Shaken Not Stirred, the Bond girls with silly names, even though Dr. No did have a Bond girl with silly names. This one really takes it up a notch with the Bond girl. And so everything that we have come to love about the James Bond franchise basically stems from Goldfinger, and I think just because of that alone, like as a movie, I think this movie is just good. But as a James Bond movie, I think that this movie is definitely shaken and not stirred. Thunderball! Thunderball is a very interesting movie to me because I thought that it was fun, but I thought that it was a little bit too long. It just kind of felt like it was dragging on a little bit, like especially all the fight sequences. I thought they just lasted a little bit too long. The underwater sequences I thought were fantastic, but again, the underwater fighting sequences, eventually I was like, okay, they're just harpooning this guy again, like let's move it on a little bit over here. So I think Thunderball, I'm gonna go good, but I think it's gonna be worse than Dr. No. Like how I'm gonna do this is the movies on the right are gonna be worse than the movies on the left, like the ones on the far left I'm gonna like more than the ones on the far right. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So anyways, I think Thunderball is good. I think there's a lot of fun to be had in it. This is where we get these really goofy gadgets like the jetpack at the start and stuff like that, but I don't think the goofy gadgets and Sean Connery's really fun performance and the sharks, this is kind of our first introduction to sharks in the James Bond movie as well, I guess, if I'm remembering correctly. But I think that the overuse of length for the fights kind of drags it down a little bit. Oh, You Only Live Twice. This one may come as a surprise. This one, I don't know how people's feelings are. I don't remember what people's feelings are in this one, but You Only Live Twice is shaken, not stirred for me. It is really fun. Yes, it is sort of a little bit racist to Asian culture. Sean Connery literally becomes a Japanese person in this movie, and it is a little bit hard to watch. Like, yes, the time period definitely shows in this movie. However, if you put that aside, if you realize that this movie came out in this time period where this was allowed to be put on screen, and you kind of you sit with it, and even though it's not okay now, you accept it for the movie that it's in. This movie is so much fun. The grandeur of this movie, like Thunderball was big and grand, yes. You Only Live Twice felt even bigger. There is some insanely large sweeping wides of James Bond, like for example running on the roof and all of these people chasing him, just like this helicopter shot, or the finale where they're in that like cave thing in the water and everything's exploding everywhere, and there's that handheld tracking shot for like 5-6 seconds, and it really makes you feel like you're in the action. Everything like big about this movie really worked for me, and I really liked the exotic location as well, but it was mostly the sense of grandeur that I got from this movie, as well as that fun plane thing that I think is in this movie. I absolutely loved this movie, but I don't think it is a James Bond. Those ones are reserved for like the master classes. Okay, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. This one is very interesting to me because I think upon further rewatches, I think On Her Majesty's Secret Service will move up on my list. But I'm going to go shocking here, and I'm going to say that it was shockingly, positively shocking, because I didn't like the action in this movie, and I didn't like, yes, it is very different. A lot of comments were saying the action is very different in this movie, which is why they like it. It is very stylized, and like you can tell that it is a different director with a different vision and stuff like that. I totally understand that. I just didn't like the action. I don't really like this close quarter, a lot of cut, like Bourne Identity sort of thing, camera movements and stuff for fighting, and this movie had that in spades. And maybe going back to it, a lot of people were saying if you rewatch it a couple times, it'll start to move up on your list and become your favorite, and so maybe that's true. I've only seen it once. I thought that George Lazenby did a really good job in this movie. However, he only had one movie, and so I didn't really get a good sense of his character, but the ending of this movie, I think the ending of this movie is so good though. That's the thing. Like, I didn't really like the action of this movie, but the nuance in the ending, the subtlety in George Lazenby's acting, this darker side of James Bond that we've never really seen before coming out in the ending when his wife gets shot. It was one of the most, if not the most shocking endings in a James Bond movie. Probably the most shocking ending in a James Bond movie up until No Time to Die. And so, you know what? I'm moving it up. I'm moving it up to good. It's definitely on the edge of good and shockingly bad, but the ending of this movie is just too good for it to be in shockingly positively shocking. Diamonds Are Forever, though, is Live and Let Die. I really don't I thought that movie was fun, but it's bad. I mean, come on, guys. This movie is pretty bad. It just feels lazy. It feels like Sean Connery is phoning it in for cash, which he kind of was because he was given such a huge sum of money to come back as James Bond. The setting is in Las Vegas, which is really boring because it's in the US, and a lot of US locations are really boring. There's that big Mars rover chase where it's moving super slow. It's like the slowest car chase in history. There was a car chase in this movie that I liked, though, where it was just like James Bond music and he's driving through the city or something, and then he goes onto his side and drives through a wall. I really enjoyed that. I still thought Sean Connery was good in this movie, but it just felt very phoned in, very tacked on. It almost feels a little bit out of place. This was also, I think, Blofeld's last appearance in the James Bond movies, and it was cool to see him, but I didn't really think they did anything with that, like, cloning thing that they had going on in this film. And then the climax of this movie on like the oil rig, I thought was very, very mess. So Live and Let Die is where Diamonds and Forever are going to stay forever. And speaking of Live and Let Die, Live and Let Die, the movie, Roger Moore's first appearance, and I'm gonna put this movie in shocking. And hear me out. Shocking is just meh. You know, shocking is like, it was okay. And that's how I feel about this movie. I don't know. A lot of people seem to really like this movie. I know my dad loves this movie, but there was something about it that I just felt like about, and especially the sheriff. I hated the sheriff in this movie. If the sheriff wasn't in this movie, maybe I would have put it in good, but every single time the sheriff was on screen, he had so much screen time. He just talked and talked and talked all of these really bad, like, racist things, and then he would like cut in between this really cool like boat chase a lot of the times, and so you'd be on the edge of your seat with this boat chase, and then you just cut to the stupid sheriff and you're like, okay, well, now I'm out of the action. And when it would cut back to the action, you would try to get into it again, but then it would just cut back to the sheriff and you would just lose yourself. Like, you wouldn't like lose yourself into the action. You just go, oh, okay, I guess we're back to the sheriff. Who cares about that awesome boat chase that's happening right now? But it was a really fun introduction for Roger Moore. So yeah, I think I'd put it in shocking. It's not one that I would actively gun for to rewatch, but it is still a pretty fun movie. The Man with the Golden Gun, I think, is good, and I'm going to put it before Dr. No. I think it is on the brink of good and shaken not stirred for me. A lot of people are very mixed on this movie, and I can understand it is a very slow-paced movie. Not a lot of things happen, but for the epic car spin with the you know what I'm talking about. This movie deserves to be a good just for that sound effect alone. The most out of place sound effect in a James Bond movie of all time. But it's fun. And it also has Christopher Lee as the villain, Mr. Mummy Dracula himself, as he sleeps like this. Like, what the heck? Who sleeps like that in real life? Maybe he actually does. I don't know. He's kind of a cool guy. But yeah, I thought he was a really fun villain. I thought, like, the set pieces, I thought his death was really cool. The three nipple thing, very iconic. And yeah, I actually really had fun watching The Man with the Golden Gun. And I would definitely put it in good, and I would definitely rewatch it. Okay. I think you know where the next one's going. The Spy Who Loved Me is going in Bond, James Bond. It's definitely above From Russia With Love, in my opinion. No, get in front of Russia With Love. There you go. It's definitely in front of Russia With Love, From Russia With Love. The Spy Who Loved Me is an epic film. It is so James Bond, it is crazy. It's got the gadgets, it's got the girls, it's got the amazing score, this blaring James Bond score, so cinematic. It's got these incredible visuals and this incredible sense of grandeur. It is so fun to watch this movie. It is like the pinnacle of, if everything in a James Bond thing, if every cliche, if every trope of James Bond works, you get The Spy Who Loved Me. You know, it is just an amazing film. Again, the grandness of it, the spectacle of this movie, I think, is unmatched up until this point, and even until later on, it doesn't really get matched again. Even when the movies get bigger, there's something about The Spy Who Loved Me that just makes it still feel bigger, even though the stakes maybe aren't as large. So it's an amazing movie. It's one that I'll definitely keep going back to when I'm going into the Roger Moore era. It's one that I absolutely adored, and yeah, James Bond, it deserves its place up there. Moonraker. Moonraker is an interesting movie. I'm gonna go shocking. I think it's worse than Live and Let Die. I don't think that it should be in the category of Live and Let Die, though, because I think that its saving grace is Jaws. Jaws is so good in this movie. I love every second of Jaws in the Roger Moore era, and this was his last film, I'm pretty sure, but this is the one where he's in the spaceship and then he sacrifices himself for James Bond and he falls in love and he becomes a good guy in this, but then he somehow lives again because he's Jaws, so obviously he can't die because he's an invincible, amazing character. But yeah, I love him. He's one of the best Bond henchmen, if not the best Bond henchman, and yeah, I think this movie is fun. The spectacle is grand, but it doesn't really feel as grand as The Spy Who Loved Me, even though there's a laser fight in space. It's a very goofy movie, and I thought the villain was only okay. However, the music in this movie was phenomenal. The music in this movie is also one of the saving. Jaws and the music. Everything else I'm very met on, but the music and Jaws, the music was so dramatic. It was so good. Some of it felt almost un-James Bond-like, but it was very refreshing, like when that lady is running in the woods and the dogs are chasing after her, and the music is this very sad, stringy music. And I've never heard something like that before in James Bond, and it was very, very affecting, and I really enjoyed it. For Your Eyes Only. Okay, so this one I think is, I think this one for me was shocking. I think it's better than Live and Let Die, though. I think it's on, nope, let's just change it like that. It's better than Live and Let Die, but I don't think I enjoyed it enough to put it into good. I thought there were some really good moments in this movie. I thought when the rock climbing sequence I thought was great, but trying to remember it now, I just don't really remember anything about it, which kind of says a lot. If there's so many James Bond movies, and yes, they kind of do merge together at certain points, but the good James Bond movies I will always remember at least the big plot points of. I don't really remember anything about For Your Eyes Only, and so shockingly, I do remember that I really liked it, but I think that putting it in shocking is where it should go, because I just remember thinking it was very slow, which is not bad. I do love some of the slow James Bond movies, as you'll see coming up. It just I don't know, it just kind of felt like it dragged a little bit, and the action didn't feel as crisp and as clean as some of the other James Bond movies. And yeah, and I just don't remember much about it, and so that just means that I must have found it a little forgettable. Octopussy. Okay, this one might be controversial, but I think this is almost a James Bond movie. This is definitely Shaken Not Stirred, and it's top tier Shaken Not Stirred too. I love this movie. I think about this movie so much for some reason, and it's mostly just the climax of this film, but oh my god, I love the climax of this film. I love actually most of this movie. When James Bond is a clown and he has to defuse the bomb, one of the most touching and affecting Roger Moore lines that he ever uttered as James Bond is in this movie. The sense of fear when he says, "There's a bomb in there," and you can hear the fear, the dread that no one's believing him. I've never heard Roger Moore, Roger Moore was a great James Bond, but the levels of emotion that he had were definitely less than some of the other James Bonds. He was very much just I always called him the horny James Bond because he got with 5 girls in every movie. But there was this emotion in that line delivery that has affected me to this day. And then also just the plane fight sequence at the end. Oh my god, it is definitely just deserving of this place. The train sequence where they're running on a train, and I heard a stuntman gets really badly injured. I'm really hoping he's okay, but man, oof, Octopussy is good. Okay, A View to a Kill, I think it's kind of bad. I think A View to a Kill, it's not as bad as Diamonds Are Forever, but it's definitely going into Live and Let Die. I will let that one live, because there are some really fun moments in that movie. The Golden Gate Bridge sequence is kind of fun when he's hanging on a blimp. It's kind of fun when he's in the mine and he's like going into all of those big mines and stuff. The Bond girl in this movie is also really fun and very intriguing. The villain had a lot of potential, but the movie just fell flat in a lot of departments. James Bond is just chilling in this house with this girl while the world's going to end, and he knows the world's going to end, but he's just chilling there, just sitting. You know, there's no urgency in this movie, which is my biggest thing. The movie just felt very relaxed. Again, there are some great moments. There's also that fire moment, I'm pretty sure this is in this movie, where the city hall is on fire or something like that, and it's super dramatic, and he's like carrying the girl on his shoulders as he's walking down the ladder. Like, it was pretty epic. I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty epic, that moment. But there's just no urgency in this movie, and so everything else around it falls flat because James Bond almost looks like he's just waltzing his way through everything. You know what I mean? So I thought it was meh. I thought I would let it live. I would watch it again, but I wouldn't gun to watch it again. And if it died, I wouldn't be too sad. Okay, this is the part where Never Say Never Again comes in. I would definitely put it in good, but I would put it at the very end of good because it's basically just Thunderball all over again, which is fine. I like Never Say Never Again, and I like Thunderball, but I liked the actual real Thunderball more than Never Say Never Again. Although it was really nice to see Sean Connery back as James Bond, and he felt like he actually wanted to be there, which was really fun to see, because after Diamonds Are Forever, I had this little sour taste in my mouth that I was really hoping that wouldn't come back with Never Say Never Again, and it didn't. And the movie actually wowed me more than I thought it was going to, but I still don't think it was as good as Sean Connery's older movies and some of the newer ones that we're gonna talk about in a second. The Living Daylights. This one is a James Bond movie to me. This one is a James Bond. I think I'm gonna put it under The Spy Who Loved Me. Ooh, actually, you know what? No, I'm not. This might be one of my favorite James Bond movies. The Spy Who Loved Me can go into second place. So Living Daylights to me is a masterpiece of a film. This movie is so good. It has the James Bond tropes. It has the really cool car, like the gadgets. It has a Bond girl. It has awesome music. You know what I mean? It has Q and stuff like that. But Timothy Dalton's performance in this movie was so unique and so different than any of the other James Bond movies that have come before it. Like, yes, it was kind of similar to George Lazenby, but it was darker than George Lazenby, but there was still a lot of nuance and subtlety in his performance. I loved the addition of just one Bond girl in this, and we got a really good sense of this relationship between James Bond and this Bond girl. And in a lot of James Bond movies, it's a bunch of girls, and so they're just there, you know, they're just kind of objects. But in this movie, she's actually a person, you know, she actually has these emotions, she has these feelings, she has a personality that gets evolved throughout the film. This movie is great. It is a great stepping stone and turning point for the James Bond franchise, and I think people are sleeping on The Living Daylights because I think that this movie is James Bond. License to Kill, Dalton's last movie. I love this movie. This is also a James Bond movie for me, but I think it goes after The Spy Who Loved Me. This movie is dark. This is a revenge story. This is Bond out for blood. Something that we have seen in the past, but not to this extent. This whole movie, Bond doesn't have a license to kill anymore. You know, I guess his license to kill is that he doesn't have a license to kill. There are some incredibly gruesome deaths in this movie, and I think Benicio del Toro in this movie, he delivers an outstanding performance. The villain, I really like him. There's nothing weird about him or anything. He's just this realistic drug dealer, which some people may find boring in a James Bond movie, but I loved that we were getting away from these maniacal, like, evil villain geniuses with weird body deformities, and we were just getting this bloke who just deals drugs. You know, it was really interesting to see. I thought the final fight was excellent in the tanker trucks, and seeing Dalton all destroyed was really hard to watch for James Bond for some reason. Like, it kind of reminded me at the end of Superman 2, or just during Superman 2, where Superman doesn't have his powers and he gets beat up. It kind of reminded me of like that, like this guy who for so many movies now we've seen as untouchable. he almost died, and I really enjoyed that moment a lot at the end of License to Kill. Also, Felix almost dies in this movie, which is shocking. It just puts you into the mindset of, oh, this movie is going for it. This movie is serious. And I just thought this movie took a lot of risks, and I thought all of those risks really paid off. Goldeneye. Goldeneye to me is also a James Bond movie, but I think it goes after From Russia with Love. I think it's on the cusp of Shaken Not Stirred and James Bond, but I actually, know what? No, I don't. I changed my mind. It goes before From Russia with Love. I enjoy the Dalton movies more than this one. This one kind of felt like a Dalton movie in disguise a little bit, but the introduction of Pierce Brosnan, an incredible Bond, and the tank sequence, oof, that tank sequence when he pauses, he fixes his tie, and he continues was so epic. Oh my god, the tank sequence alone gives this movie a James Bond. But I loved Sean Bean in this movie. I thought he was fantastic, and I loved the twist that he's alive again. I should have seen that from the credits. Of course I should have seen that, because he's at the very start of the credits. How did I not notice that? And then the end of this movie as well, I really like the fight and stuff. The end of the movie, I think, is where it loses me a little bit, because it just becomes more of a generic James Bond movie, and then up until that point, it's very much a spy movie. Goldeneye is probably, if I had to point to the spyiest movie, the James Bond movie that feels most like a spy movie, it would be Goldeneye up until the last like 20 minutes. And so that is why I really enjoyed it. I really liked the pacing. I loved the Bond girl in this movie, that Russian lady. She was so good. Her acting when everything is blown up around her was insane. Some of the best Bond girl acting I've ever seen. And then I have, come to think of it, really liked the henchman in this movie, that lady who just loves hurting people for pleasure. She is so scary, but she is so cool, and her death is terrifying. Tomorrow Never Dies. I'm gonna give it a shocking. I'm gonna give this one a shocking, positively shocking, but I still really enjoyed it. So it's gonna be kind of on the cusp between good and positively shocking. I thought this one was okay. I thought that the guy, the villain, was just really not terrifying. Like, I was never scared of him. His henchman I thought was a little terrifying, but the villain, I felt no fear, and that's really sad, because if you don't feel any fear for the villain, then they're not going to make any sequences scary in the first place. But I liked the idea of fake news. I think it's funny that some people were saying that when this movie came out, everyone was like, this is a stupid premise, because why would the news want to fake things? And we live in an age where fake news is commonplace, and you have to really make sure that your sources are right before you agree with like an article or something like that. So this movie almost feels like it was made like 20 years too early, but I really enjoyed it. I thought the firefights were pretty cool. I thought Michelle Yeoh in this movie was awesome. I thought her martial arts stuff was really cool. The motorcycle helicopter sequence, while maybe it did last a little too long, was epic. And the final fight I thought was really fun, even though it was just boom 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 like guns akimbo. The world is not enough. This movie is going to get... This is hard. This movie's going to get a good, but it's going to be on the other side of the line than Tomorrow Never Dies. I think this movie is really fun. I really like Christmas in this movie. She's just, I didn't know that it was Christmas in July. I thought Christmas only came once a year. For those lines, it gets a good. But like, she was fine in this movie. I liked the villain in this movie as well. I thought she was really cool. Like, the guy villain, I thought was kind of lame. The female villain, I forget her name now, I thought she was really cool. I really liked her connection with James Bond. I like how I didn't realize that she was going to be bad until right before she became bad. And I thought her death was so shocking. Her death, she just gets shot instantly, like boom, and she just, oh my days, like, it's really cool to see. But I think where this movie loses me is the villain of this movie. Like, the guy in this movie was really just not, I don't know, he kind of let me down a little bit. He's this guy, he doesn't feel any pain, and I think you could do some really cool stuff with that, and the movie never really does. And the whole submarine fight at the end just felt like this very anticlimactic way to end this very big feeling James Bond movie. Die Another Day. Oh, Die Another Day. This one's going to be interesting. I know a lot of people would put it in Live and Let Die. I know a lot of people think this is probably the worst James Bond movie of all time, but I have to say, I would watch this one more than a lot of the other James Bond movies. I think that this one is shocking. I don't think it is horrible. I think this movie is actually really fun. And hear me out. Yes, the special effects of this movie are very bad. Like, very, very bad. But I think that's where the fun comes from them. You know, you watch this movie, you know you're getting into a bad movie. That's how I knew. I knew this movie was going to be pretty bad. So I sat there when I was doing my reaction. I was like, you know what? I'm going to just have a good time with this movie. And a good time I did. The villain is weak. But some of the action, if you look past the bad CGI, is actually really fun. The hovercraft sequence at the start, really cool. I really like that James Bond gets recaptured. Like, during the opening credits, he's being tortured and stuff. It's something that we've never really seen before, and it was kind of this really cool opening to a movie. I liked Halle Berry in this movie. I always like Halle Berry, but she didn't really do anything, but she was still fun because she made some good one-liners, and I liked her sword fight on the plane. Like, the whole plane sequence at the end I thought was really cool. I thought the laser effects were really awesome, and just the amount of fun I had with the surfing sequence on the giant wave was just out of this world. It was just out of this world. It was so much fun, and like, I know this movie has a lot of faults. I know this movie is really pretty bad, but I had so much fun with this movie, I would be lying if I put it in Live and Let Die. So shocking is where it's going to stay. And now we get into the Craig movies. These are movies I did not watch on the channel because I've already seen all the Craig movies. And so let's go through them. Let's see what my thoughts are. Obviously, they're not going to be as in-depth as if I actually watched them on the channel, but you'll get a sense of how I feel about the Craig movies. Daniel Craig is my favorite James Bond just because he was the first James Bond that I ever watched, the first James Bond that I watched in theaters. So I'll always have a soft spot for James Bond. I never had any of that controversy when he was going into the role and they're like, oh, he has blue eyes or something like that. Like, I don't really care about that. I think he's a great James Bond. I think he's super gritty and everything like that. I really like most of his movies. I say 3 out of the 5 of his movies I really like, and 2 of them I dislike quite a bit. So like, maybe his movies aren't my favorite, but he's my favorite James Bond. So let's get into it with Casino Royale. This is a Bond James Bond movie. This is one of my favorite James Bond movies of all time. I'm gonna put it right in the middle of the pack. This movie, as an opening for James Bond, it kind of rebooting the franchise. You know, you get that black and white sequence in the bathroom and he becomes a 000 agent, something we've never seen before in the James Bond movies. And a lot of the stuff in Daniel Craig movies are actually things that we've never really seen before, especially the first one and the last one. You know, you're getting into a gritty tone in this one from the opening. Mads Mikkelsen as the villain is insanely scary, and the whole casino aspect around this, the gambling, was really cool. And the moment where he's on like a tanker truck and then he jumps onto a plane at one point in this movie, I think during the climax, is crazy. They do like that car stunt where the car just flips on the road, and it's the most flips in any James Bond, even in any James Bond movie, but the most flips a car flips in any film ever. Like, it was historical. That was really awesome. And the moment in this movie that will always be ingrained in my head is when the villain in this movie, Mads Mikkelsen, is whipping James Bond's nuts. Oh my god, like, ugh. When I was a kid and I watched that, I think I almost threw up. But if anything sticks on my mind from Casino Royale into the future, it's that sequence alone. But I think that Casino Royale is an insanely good way to open a James Bond franchise / reboot a James Bond franchise / just a really amazing James Bond movie in general. Quantum of Solace is Live and Let Die. This is a bad movie, and I think I'm going to put it there for now, in front of Diamonds Are Forever, because I know Quantum of Solace had a lot of problems. There was a writer's strike, so Daniel Craig had to kind of hop in and change the script and write the script because all the writers had left and things like that. There were a lot of behind the scenes problems with this movie. But it is a bad movie. I've only seen it once or twice. I never rewatch it. Like, I don't usually like go and like rewatch all the Craig movies in order. Usually I'll just pick the ones that I really like and go, okay, I feel like Casino Royale tonight, or I feel like Skyfall tonight. You know, like I do that. But Quantum of Solace is a movie that I've never gone back to with intention of watching again. The only reason I would have watched it a second time is because a friend wanted to watch it, and so I just watched it with them. But it's pretty bad. The camera work in this movie especially is horrible. It's like On Her Majesty's Secret Service with the choppy camera work, but like 10,000 times worse. You know what I mean? Like the fights are almost inconceivable in this movie. The whole movie is super short as well. It's only 90 minutes. I guess 90 minutes isn't really a flaw, but everything just feels really rushed in this movie, really uneven. It feels like a first draft of a James Bond movie, which maybe had a lot of potential, but then we just got this kind of garbage instead. So Quantum of Solace is very bad. Skyfall. Okay, Skyfall for me is a Bond James Bond movie, and I'm gonna put it in between Bond James Bond and Shaken Not Stirred, because Skyfall, I think, as a movie is Shaken Not Stirred, but Skyfall to me personally was the first James Bond movie that I ever saw in the movie theaters, and so I will always have a place in my heart for Skyfall. No matter how many times I watch it, the nostalgia of me sitting in a movie theater and hearing the opening James Bond theme song play with him, like the gun barrel sequence, and then we hear the James Bond music in a movie theater for the first time, I associate it with Skyfall. And so the nostalgia alone, I would be lying if I put it anywhere lower than Bond James Bond. Like, maybe it's not as good as people were saying it was when it came out, because I know everyone was like, oh my god, Skyfall is a masterpiece, and now I think the conversation has turned a little bit to Skyfall is a little bit overrated. But I love this movie. The whole London Underground sequence with the subway I think is great, but I think it's really the Scotland home invasion sort of thing where they're defending the home and then they're walking through the grass and James Bond falls in the water and then M gets shot. Like, all of these things happen at the end of this movie, I think are so dramatic and so good. I think the visuals of this movie are like insane, like some of the most beautiful visuals that we've seen in a James Bond movie. And I think Daniel Craig's performance and Judi Dench's performance, this movie has a lot of Judi Dench in it, but I think both performances are fantastic. I think the weak parts, I think the villain is definitely a little weak. However, I'm just super nostalgic for this movie, and so that is why I'm giving Skyfall a Bond James Bond. And the last one on this list, but not the last Craig movie, I will talk about No Time to Die, but right now we're talking about Spectre, and Spectre is Live and Let Die for me. See, Daniel Craig is very much Bond James Bond, Casino Royale and Skyfall, and then Live and Let Die, Spectre, and Quantum of Solace. Spectre to me is super boring. I don't think I'd put it last. I'd put it at the start of Live and Let Die. It is just a lazy James Bond movie. The opening sequence I think is really fun with that long take of him walking along the roofs of the buildings and he falls onto the couch and stuff. I think that's really fun. The rest of the movie is very forgettable. I've only seen this movie once, and that was when it was in theaters. And I remember I walked out of theaters and I was like, I have no intention of watching that movie again. It was just a drag. The runtime of this movie just feels like it takes forever. There's no really any stakes in this movie. James Bond just kind of walks around and just shoots at people and they just can't hit him, and he doesn't even try and hide. He just walks around and shoots this guy on the wall and then shoots this guy and then shoots this guy. The giant explosion in this movie is cool because it was the biggest explosion in film history and it's awesome to watch, but it's wasted in such a bad movie, you know what I mean? Like, if this was that explosion was in an epic James Bond movie, can you imagine how even more epic that James Bond movie would be? But like Spectre, no one's gonna rewatch Spectre, so that explosion is just useless. And I'm sure there were behind the scenes drama for this movie as well, but I just find this movie really boring, and it's sad because the movie is called Spectre. Something like Spectre is such a cool organization in James Bond, and we get to see Blofeld and stuff like that, but it's just kind of a waste of time in my opinion. And last but not least is No Time to Die, the final Daniel Craig movie and the last James Bond movie that we have up into this current day. So I would put that movie in Shaken Not Stirred. I really enjoy No Time to Die. I saw it on Thursday opening night at midnight, and there were so many dads in the theaters, and they were so enthusiastic with that movie. I've never been to it. Like Skyfall, my first James Bond movie, was really fun because it was my first experience with James Bond in a movie theater. Spectre was a really lame theater experience because no one was into that movie. No Time to Die, opening night, midnight, premiere, like the first showing in Vancouver I went to, and it was phenomenal. The atmosphere was amazing. The dads were going wild. When Daniel Craig dies at the end, you could hear some sniffles in the audience there. It was really cool to see and just have that experience. But since then, I've watched No Time to Die 2 more times, I think on just my own time and not in theaters. And I've got to say, I still really enjoy it. I think Rami Malek is a little bit wasted as the villain. I think that he is a really cool villain, and I really like the intro with him and stuff when he's wearing the mask and he's just going around, and it's almost like a horror movie at the start. It's really, really terrifying, but I don't think they do too much with him after that point. And I also think it's weird that he looks the exact same like 20 years later or something, because the main Bond girl in this was a kid at the start of the movie, you know what I mean? So he should have looked a lot older than he actually did, which I found very strange. But besides that, and besides the wasted villain potential, I really just enjoyed this movie. The cinematography in this movie was outstanding. Some incredible images, visuals, and I thought the score of this movie was fantastic, and the ending of this movie is always so sad, because Daniel Craig, again, is my James Bond. He is my first James Bond. He was my only James Bond for years and years, like a decade probably. And I watched his movies, Skyfall and Casino Royale, a lot. I watched those movies a lot. And so seeing him die on screen, I didn't know that no James Bonds had died before. I thought that they would have died. And then after the movie, my dad was like, yeah, James Bond has never died on screen before. And I was kind of in shock there for a second. I was like, well, how are they putting more James Bond? Is he like a single character throughout all of these movies? But then how does he not age? You know, I was a little confused by that. But seeing him die, hearing his last words, seeing him just look at the missiles and knowing he's going to die, and the music is starting to swell, it was just so emotional for me seeing this guy go, this man who has been James Bond my entire life. He's been James Bond for so long, literally since basically I was born until now. He has been my James Bond. He has been who I've associated with James Bond. And so seeing him go was really emotional for me. I definitely crying in the theaters. And yeah, No Time to Die will always have a special place in my heart for that emotional ending. And it will always get me with that emotional ending, just because of how much I really enjoyed Daniel Craig and how much I grew up with him and looked up to his James Bond movies as these really cool action James Bond flicks that I knew my dad liked, so there was like that connection as well. And just the end of this movie I thought was amazing, and that's kind of what I have to say about it right now. So yeah, that is my tier list for James Bond. So yeah, we got like The Living Daylights and stuff, like all the Dalton movies in the top tier Bond. And it's really funny that the Daniel Craig movies are like Bond, James Bond, and then Live and Let Die, like bottom and top. I just think that's really funny to me. But I mean, I don't think that proves that Daniel Craig is like a worse James Bond. A lot of the people in my comments were like, Daniel Craig is the worst James Bond. I hate him because he has these really bad movies. But I mean, every James Bond has bad movies, you know. But I think this is a pretty fair list. There are more James Bond movies than I initially thought I had. I thought there were only going to be like 3 of them or 4 of them. But as I was going through this tier list, I realized that there are actually a lot of amazing James Bond movies, and even like the good ones or the positively shocking ones are Bond movies that I would go back to. Like the good ones I would definitely go back to. The shocking ones I would go back to, but not as frequently. And the Live and Let Die ones are like, if I never watched this movie again, like my life really wouldn't change, and I don't think I'd ever regret about it. But overall, I've really enjoyed the franchise. I've really enjoyed watching all these James Bond movies along with you guys. If you guys haven't seen my videos, then please go check them out. I mean, if you don't want to, though, then that's also fine. And if you just wanted to hear what my thoughts are on the James Bond movies, then that's okay too. But if you have been watching my James Bond videos along the way, along the James Bond journey, then thank you so much for checking everything out. I hope that you enjoyed this tier list. I hope that it kind of gave you a little bit more insight onto my opinions on each James Bond movies, and especially the Daniel Craig movies. I know a lot of people are really sad that I wasn't going to be watching them, and so I'm hoping that Even though I only talked about them briefly, you got a good idea of how I see Daniel Craig as James Bond and how I see his movies as well. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. It's very sad to be ending all the James Bond movies and even this tier list, because once I end this tier list, it's kind of the end of James Bond content, which is really sad to me. But at the same time, it's always time to move on. It's always time to change. James Bond is changing. The movies on my channel will change to another series eventually. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening to me talk for what's probably almost an hour at this point. And yeah, I'll see you next time for my next movie reaction.